Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for the next expert panel of the day, presenting the ideas on the topic, Addressing Cognitive and Emotional Intelligence through a Police Center of Excellence. Given the increasing ambiguity of cyber threats on one hand and the digital divide on the other, the panel proposes to establish a center of excellence driven by approaches from cognitive intelligence, artificial intelligence, and analytical research. I would like to invite the following panelists to take their seat on stage, please. Mr. Stephen Anurag, Officer from National Institute for Smart Government, Government of India. Mr. Mayur Dayananda, Aspiring Junior, UC San Diego, Cognitive Science and Neuroscience, California. Ms. Nalini Raghuraman, Political Economy Advisor with the UK Embassy, Hyderabad. Mr. Shaun D'Souza, Poll Analyst and Member, the Center for Future of Democracy, Hyderabad. Dr. Vasuprada Kartic, Consultant, Anthroposophic, Psychotherapist, Hyderabad.
I'm happy and elated to moderate this panel here, which we have come up with a very unique discussion point for the panel, and people sitting with me on the stage are from diverse walks of life, both professionally and academically. So I thank all the panelists for making it once again. COVID has taught us many lessons, and for the last few months and a year or two, we've been hearing a lot about post-COVID measures and post-COVID policies and how things have been changing, how technology is very important on one hand. And technology is rising on the one hand, and there's concepts of intelligences with regards to cognitive, artificial, and emotional on the mainland India. But our panel would be discussing about the digital divide mainly, and where there are tech haves and tech have-nots, and there is a large gaps in the dissemination of public policy information to the communities across, and how the police system can be made more enhanced in terms of addressing these three intelligences, which is cognitive, emotional, and artificial. So our abstract talks about proposing a center of excellence with the police in terms of this, with local and global collaborations with the academia and the other research think tanks across the globe. And with me I have Dr. Vasuprada Kartic, Consultant, Anthroposophic, and the Psychotherapist from Hyderabad. And then I have Mr. Mayur Dayananda, who is an Aspiring Junior with the University of California, San Diego. And then we have Ms. Nalini Raghuraman, and Political Economy Advisor with the UK Embassy, the British Deputy High Commissioner in Hyderabad. And then we have Mr. Shaun D'Souza, who is from the NGO sector and a startup entrepreneur. So moving forward, we have come up with some basic statistics, which is already available online, or also on the event schedule, which we have written on what is that we would like to look forward to. And this, the reason why five of us are sitting here and we are discussing about the Center of Excellence is there is a unique proposal that we would like to come forward with. We would like to include the diversity factor, the inclusion of not only the academia, the bureaucrats, and the public policy consultants, but also veteran subject expert politicians who are really good at some subjects, and who have the public policy at various stages many people have been exploring public policy at various levels, both at the academia and also the practice level. So this 3-day workshop is ideally bridging the gap between theory and practices. So our panel, by proposing this Center of Excellence, would rightly address this particular issue of bridging the digital divide, and how this Center of Excellence through this police can address the issues of the tech haves and have-nots, and how we could include the psychological aspects to better the governance procedures. I would like to start with Dr. Vasuprada Kartic. So if you could give us your introductory remarks with regards to this concept. We've been discussing quite a lot of time for now regarding cognitive and psychology, and how this marginalized communities and also the tribals, how they have been, I wouldn't say systematically been put away, but they have been away from the mainline digital or the tech savvy. So what are your introductory remarks to your experiences in the last 20-25 years?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Am I audible? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Taking this digital divide in the context of psychology, mental health, and looking at the past and what's going on right now, pandemic has shown us totally something, and I think it brought it to the forefront as to how strong and how glaring is the digital divide. Because we as mental health professionals also could reach some people and try to work with them because they had access to online work. But there are those that maybe earlier we were working with them in person in different remote areas, and pandemic never allowed us to do it. So there was no contact, and I do know that there were a lot of distress, and there was one of the common things that did happen to everyone was a lot of anxiety, and we could not really reach out to people who were not aware of what's going on. Because if we really think about it, we all had access to a lot of updates, a lot of things that were coming to us, a lot of things that were being told to us. But if you do not really have much of access to some of these updates coming all the time, then you are bound to feel that you are left behind. And one of the other segments that did get very badly affected was also the education part. Because schools had turned online, education had turned online, and that itself was difficult for children who had access to technology, found it difficult to somehow convert to learning. But imagine the ones who do not even have a mobile now to have access, and then of course the teachers also, they were not equipped to really teach that way. We're talking about let us say the far-flung schools and the government segment and the tribal societies. It was a game lost even before it had begun. So that was quite a bit of a challenge, and they couldn't really get the kind of a support. So, and this divide, I think we have been seeing for a long time in terms of even reaching out for help, because maybe because they're more educated here in terms of how to use technology primarily, and the ones who do not have it with them do not know how to ask for help when they need it. So I'm talking primarily from the context of mental health and emotional well-being. And we all know, I mean, we are from this country which has a huge focus on performance. We want children to grow, we want young people to achieve something. And when exams are up, every single time, I'm sure all of you who have read newspapers or watched news at all, every single time there's an exam result out, there's something else that you see as well, that somebody has done something or attempted suicides. And why do these things happen? So I'm just, maybe I'll bring it to the context more into the full context later, but I just wanted to give it as a starting point now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your introductory remarks, Doctor. And I'd like to go with Mr. Mayur, who is more into this cognitive sciences and he could relate more into it. Could you give us some introductory remarks of the topic?
Looking at it from a cognitive science perspective, we find that technology is no longer just an asset or an augmentation of the human mind, but we find that the human mind is capable of absorbing the tools that it uses and to actually make it a part of its own processing system. So when you have when you have large sections of society without any access to these technologies, they are inherently incapable of facing a new set of challenges which another section of society is better suited to face, right? And it also begs us to redefine what we consider to be human intelligence, and it blurs the lines between human intelligence and technology to the point where it does become the need of the hour to make technology more accessible and ensure that it's not limited to certain sectors of society which even otherwise are more well advantaged.
Right. Thank you for that. May I request Ms. Nalini Raghuraman to give her introductory remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Stevens. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. Basically, my work as far as the British High Commission goes is mostly my interaction with the police has been on my programs front, where I worked a bit with capacity building, especially around anti-human trafficking, related to anti-human trafficking work in Andhra Pradesh. And of course, this is a work that's the High Commission has been doing in several posts across the country as well. So that's a little bit of the background. But as you said, I think Vasuprada has already mentioned, the pandemic really kind of jolted everyone up. It brought most of the economies across the world to a halt, and there were this strict lockdowns which forced countries, governments to look at alternative methods to reach out to Can you hear me now? So, did you hear at least a little bit, or
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, so I think it made it forced the governments and countries to look at alternative solutions to reach out to people, to see that there is service delivery to the last mile, and that is where the digital technology solutions came into play, and there's more focus on that, and it made people adopt, create online tools, technology tools, and also adopt them in a big time. So it enabled a lot of businesses, institutions, academic institutions, and several other government departments to take up these technologies and to shift it from face-to-face to non-face-to-face models. But one thing, the underlying thing that happened was, it made the digital divide more pronounced. It highlighted that quite a bit. It came out to the forefront. I mean, as Dr. Vasuprada specifically pointed out, that that's this huge, big, sizable population that had been excluded from this, the whole space. So, but it's not that all of this happened only during the pandemic. It only highlighted it, but this kind of a digital divide, it did exist in pre-pandemic times too, but it was mostly, we talked about lack of awareness or access to digital tools. But and this divide has become a very crucial factor, for building sustainable economies. So that's where it really brought out issues about social inequalities, kind of mirrored what the kind of digital divide. The people who are excluded are people who are face difficult socio-economic conditions, who face those challenges. So mostly, if you see, it's the tribal population, it is women, there's a huge gender gap there. I have read a statistics which says that if the mobile phones users in the country around, say, 60 to 63% or so, women hardly constitute around 30%, which is like very, very low. Even in that, you will find that not many of them have smartphones. They have a normal mobile phone, which does not connect to an internet per se, but it's just or they don't know how to operate a smartphone. So the situation is pretty, stark that way in terms of the digital divide, and of course the result is that they are completely excluded from most of the benefits of digitization. They completely lose out on the benefits of that. So I think this is something which needs to be addressed. And of course, at the higher end, if you look at it, the countries in the global north, they have recognized that they've recognized the new digital era, and they have adopted high-end tools. They've brought about a lot of research and innovation, investments into artificial intelligence and blockchain and Internet of Things and so on and so forth. So they are putting in a lot of investments into digital infrastructure, while the digital south, I mean, when you look at the global south, they are trying to keep pace. There's still this huge gap between the north and the south, and with the south trying to catch up with the north. So
which side are you saying? Because you work for a global North Embassy. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm not talking in terms of from the High Commission's perspective per se, but as a person who has been working in various capacities in the development sector in my past job record. So I've been working almost since past 2 decades before I joined the High Commission in the development sector. So I do recognize these issues. So of course India too has a very ambitious digital mission in place. I think they have to reach 1 trillion economy by 2025. It's but still, when you look at it globally, when you look at the global north, it's still a small, comparatively not a huge figure, not a huge number. We still have a long way to go to keep pace, because one is to maintain competitiveness. Of course, the other is to really reach, look at service delivery in terms of reaching out to the last mile. So that's also another important. Both these criteria need to be met. So, there's one more statistic which I saw in the UN website, which says that in spite of a huge increase in digital technologies globally across the world, but if you look at the UN designated, least developed countries, you have say 80% of the population which is out of that, they're offline. And if you look at the developing countries, they are about say 53% offline, and then when it comes to the developed countries, it is only 13% offline. So that's the kind of extent we are looking at in terms of the digital divide. I think that's a pressing need that needs to be addressed. And like you have a kind of a what shall I say, global consensus building across globally in terms of climate change and all. I think this is something also which we need to build a kind of consensus across globally on bridging the digital divide. I shall stop there.
Thank you for introductory remarks. Now I request Mr. Shaun D'Souza to give us brief remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen.
Secretary.
Okay. It's working.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Stephen. I feel the youth and the NGO community has been a key pillars in success of any of a policy. So here what is currently happening is that there's a lot of gap which we can see in the flow of information. It can be towards the law, or it can be in any policy among the youth and the NGOs, because of which there is a lack in the works getting done of the people, and any policy be successful in a positive way. So the youth and everybody is not coming together because there's a lack of flow of information. So here we want to come up and fill this gap by sensitizing them, giving them awareness. In a positive way, through which can be done through the Center of Excellence, is what we are planning.
Thank you for that. So the NSO, a recent study at the NSO 2020 in India, it's found that almost statistics are anyways available online. It says 4% of the rural population and 4% of the rural households and 23% of the urban households have access to the internet, and less than 30% of the rural population and have internet penetration or access to even mobile data. So while in the cities or in semi-urban places that we are talking about intelligences, I mean, we've been talking about technology. Now we are moving forward with artificial intelligence, which not many people, including me, I'm clearly, maybe you could, Mayur, you could fill in that gap, but exactly that is. And now we are going ahead with cognitive and emotional intelligences. While there is a major chunk of population which hardly have mobile, internet facility. So there is a growing divide. And on the other hand, we have cyber threats, cyber warfare, the crimes increasing, and on the other side, the police have been, majority of the stations at the field level are resorted towards the conventional methods of resolving these cases, while there are methods and approaches which can be adopted to resolve this in a very quick way, in a smart way, I could put it, with the help of technology. So in this global rat race world, so where one end, as Ms. Nalini was mentioning, there's this global north which is rapidly going forward with post-NPM, post-new public management perspectives, while I mean, we are still with this bureaucratic model, and I think there's need to be more inclusion of this public-private partnership, which I think Dr. Vasuprada could further highlight it on, and PPPs at various level, not ideally compromising the integrity or you could say the level of confidence of the law enforcement agencies. So what I would put forward for our next discussion point is, through this Center of Excellence which we are proposing to any state government, why should there be a Center of Excellence that a police should take an active role in it? What is the necessity, and what newness or what uniqueness is this particular Center of Excellence led by the police is bringing to the society? So there are many research institutes like ISB, like you have Indian Institute of Science Bangalore, and other private and governmental-led research think tanks. The myriad of organizations across the globe. So this concept of Center of Excellence led by the police, how difference would that make? I would like to start with asking Mr. Mayur on this.
So what we find in India is that there's rarely any large-scale experimentation when it comes to policing. Whereas in the United States, you find that police experiments involve almost entire cities or neighborhoods. In India, we tend to stick to what has been tried and tested so far. But when these methods were developed, they didn't really rely much on technology or it had a basis in cognitive science theories, right? So now we have the opportunity to actually change the way humans think, to change the way police officers think by having technology that's programmable. Because the human brain, we know, isn't as changeable as technology. Once it's wired and once it's coded, you can't exactly change it. But with technology, you can change the integral coding of it. And when this technology is being incorporated into the minds of, into the training methods, there's an additional there's an additional access to the priors and the biases of police officers, and we get to actually change the psychology of the police officers.
Since you mentioned psychology, I'll have to move towards Dr. Vasup's already. So I would like you to, we were discussing earlier about this public-private partnership, and don't you think there's already a large stake of public-private partnership, this concept being engaged in the government sectors in India, and but how would this particular center of excellence create a differential role, creating this impact of bridging this digital divide and taking the public policy execution at the next level?
Yeah. So, primarily when we are talking about partnership, I would not really call it public-private, but I would say the partnership of all stakeholders. And it's important because when you just look at the concept of crime, concept of police, and concept of punishment or justice, law enforcement. So somehow, the way this concept of law enforcement has changed in human mind, because people started thinking that enforcement naturally has force within it. And now that is one thing that we need to work with, because unfortunately, many different inputs have been given to the people that police represents force. Police represents forceful use of methods in order to enforce law and order. And this perception has to change. I remember way back we had done, I had done a training for police officers in the administrative staff college about the concept of citizen-friendly policing. Primarily not for any other reason. One is to make them aware that friendliness is not putting aside your uniform. So I'm just saying that the change of concept that happens in the police officers is one part, but along with that, how do we change the perception of people? Because that is what is going to be more important in the whole bringing down the crime or to bringing down the divide. Because when you're talking about the divide, it's always like the police are on the other side and people are on this side, which is not the truth. Essentially, we need to start believing that we are together in this. And I think that those bringing down of those barriers can be done primarily through a lot of training in terms of how, even Mayur was just saying that dropping the biases, moving across from the prejudices, and because we have been given certain concepts so strongly, wherein I'm yet to find, unless it is pure just entertainment, a real story that says that there is in movies or even TV series, whether it is across the globe, you can randomly pick one off Netflix and see it. If there is a policeman being portrayed as somebody good, I would like to see it. And this is something we need to change. And this has to come, that's when the public-private partnership as well as the partnership of all stakeholders comes in, because we are changing the concept of the person wearing the uniform is a friendly policeman, somebody who you can reach out to. Yesterday I was there in a doctor's meet, and they were saying something like, one of the top doctors was saying that there was a time when doctors were looked at like gods. Today people are waiting to point fingers. And I guess in a lot of ways that has happened with police as well. We ran to police for help, but these days do people run to police for help is a second question. So I think we have to change the perceptions, and it is not just with, so it's not just the policemen themselves, the police officers themselves, but it is a system. We have to work with the system itself. And using media, using all the possible digital modalities, we can reach across to people to tell them that it is this is available, these services are available, that we are here for you. And emotional intelligence training has been done in certain countries, primarily with the police officers, so that, see, when a mob is trying to come in, don't you think a police officer who's there and his entire team who are there, will they not be afraid? I mean, they're human beings. They're bound to think like human beings. But then, as Mayur again was saying, that our human mind is phenomenal. We can train it. If we do not train it, then it works on instinct. And instinct is always very emotional, but with training, we become emotionally intelligent beings. So we know when to respond rather than react. And I think it's very important that we learn this as a skill, as a part of curriculum, as a part of something that is going to look at how crimes are happening. And this one concept, it is so nice in the concept of psychology and crime. It's called situational prevention of crime. And the situational prevention of crime is what we need to focus on, because it gives us all the tools how to work with situations in such a way that they are diffused even before they have happened. So you're giving skills like this, then I think we are actually addressing the need already. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
In fact, I think over here it would be something to mention here is Dr. Jonathan Page of Washington, D.C. has been working on micro-training methods, right? So this aims to bridge the gap between our cognitive processing and emotional processing. So for a police officer, this is important to actually slow down the situations that they face whenever they are facing a highly stressful situation, like she said, like in a mob or any criminal situations. It is important to slow it down so that you're not responding emotionally, but you're taking the time to have a cognitive approach to it. But rather than focusing on the this one training method, the need is to have experimentation to see what works for our police officers and to recognize that there is no global solution for it. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for it. And we need to see, because the biases and priors that Indian police officers have is not the same that American or British police officers have, right? And so, which is why we need constant experimentation and constant innovation.
Thanks for bringing that. Actually, while I was in the UK, it was during the COVID. So during COVID, when I was stationed in London, I got an opportunity to get associated with the New Scotland Yard, the London Metropolitan Police. And it's quite interesting because I've seen even people at the age of 45, 42 applying for police services. And I've come across a gentleman who has a business running, and he also has a community center, and he has applied for a position of constable. It surprised me, and it intrigued me, and I started asking him. I mean, back in our country, constable is someone, it starts with the lowest in the police administration. Yes. So it starts with the constable and it ends with the Director General, and the level of information that the Director General has, or the level of training that the Director General has, or even you take the district level, the Superintendent of Police has, or the level of training, the regular information or capacity building that the constable has. There's a huge difference in the gap. And I think it's to deal with the policy, and not only the policy but also the behavior towards the policy. It's the behavior towards the uniform. So uniform with 1 star has a different approach. Uniform with 0 star, it's like, he's just a constable. So if there are 3 stars, automatically it's a psychological effect that, it's 3 stars, but he might be a little higher authority, so we'll have to be really careful with that. And well, back in London, and I was also briefly put as an observer for this police recruitment thing which was happening, and the recruitment was happening not just on the physical test, but also on the mental
and capability, and also on the generic common sense. I mean, there's also questions and activities, street smart activities, in fact. So there's something called weapon sweeping. While and I was also involved to go and give a review about it with few officers, and then we were sent to a London Hyde Park corner, and that's a huge park where near the Royal Buckingham Palace, and then we were asked to do weapon sweeping, and they hid weapons, and ideally we would go for bushes and all. So that's, there are strategic locations, and it's all street smart activities. So I would ask you, since you're now in the United States, you've been observing there's a growing kind of a gun culture there. So it is the global north which tries to come up with the policies of zero pollution, no pollution, COP26, COP31, but we have seen recently how in Egypt the level of pollution that has taken place by the world leaders going in, the flights and the jets. So there's always this contradiction of the policy that is being designed and the policy that is being executed and the checks and balances of it. So we would come to that part of what the Center of Excellence would deal with regards to it. But before that, I'd like to ask you, since you are a student of cognitive intelligence and sciences, would this particular technology be adopted in a very conventional, traditional methodology that where we see we see decoration? In Indian bureaucracy or in Indian work culture, we decorate people not just because of the name, but the title and the position that they have to the back. So I haven't seen that in the UK because I've been there and I was deeply involved. Briefly involved with the system there, and I've personally witnessed it. So there is no decoration to any kind of an officer there, or a decoration to a politician as well. So here, that kind of a setup is there. Can this kind of a technological intervention, driven by data, statistics, research, and all the three intelligences that we are talking about, AI, forget about AI now, let it be cognitive or emotional. Can we use some of the cognitive techniques which can be employed during the recruitment of the law enforcement agencies? Can it ease out this mechanism where we can have more of analytical capacity building rather than a physical test to be as a major chunk of in the selection process of at least at the state level police officers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think there's a need for a more comprehensive assessment of constables or police officers during employment, and to understand that to understand where the individual is coming from, their backgrounds and their personal histories, and how that influences how they're going to be moving forward in their careers. So to that, are you asking if
would it even be possible to?
I'm not saying it can be materialized like an objective kind of an answer where, because not everyone is from the same. That's why we have a reservation system, because not everyone had English education. Not everyone is accessible for a very sophisticated education and awareness. So at this point of time where people majority of the population from the rural or the tribal locations are hardly aware of the tech interventions or the technology aspects that's happening on the mainland. Mm-hmm. I see many people, when you go to a bus station here and you see buses coming from a tribal like Adilabad in a corner of places, they just looking at IKEA, they'll be like, oh man, what is this? So they don't have any information about this. Oh, this is what? This is like there's something else. It's like an alien world for them. And so in this regard, can cognitive techniques be employed in this particular of recruitment? Can it ease the recruitment procedures that we have, and can help? You can also debate what is the need for this. Is there a need? Everything's happening well. We are recruiting the way we are recruiting. The country is functioning, but are we really in that spotlight of the other countries where the policing is at the next level? Because so far the crime rates haven't also been that sophisticated, but we should be ready. We should be ready for the technology epidemics. We should be ready with the cyber warfare. It's inevitable. So with regards to that cognizance, so can we employ some of the cognitive techniques? Would it be feasible at least to do some research and then through the Center of Excellence at least?
Yeah, I think it's important to start looking for people from other fields instead of trying to focus on one singular path of entry into the service, to actually begin expanding that to see what the department needs, to see what fields that the department needs to work on, whether it's psychology or computer science or any of the other fields that the police rely on, and to actually start recruiting, to start inviting people from those fields to apply. Because when you are demanding that everybody who comes into the field be required to fill in these certain criteria, like you said, physical fitness or any of the other criteria that we have right now, it demotivates a lot of people with the knowledge and the skills, with interdisciplinary knowledge and skills from coming into the department.
Thank you, but I'll get back to you, Doctor, for a quick second. So you, Mr. Shaun, you were mentioning about the NGOs and the civil societies and the youth getting involved. And you were mentioning about the dissemination, gap and all. Would you think, are there any other approaches that would be helpful? Any approach that we'll have to take up? Like, currently the information is going from the top to the bottom. So would you advise any approach that has to be adopted in order to address this particular challenge?
Yeah, here we would be using a bottom-up approach, and in the Center of Excellence, the people in the panel who would be there is not just the academicians or bureaucrats. Here also the veteran politicians with a single subject expertise will be involved, who also have a good expertise who will be worked in the single subject in the government. So these are the people who will be involved in this way. It would be used.
You think that involving veteran politicians with some subject expertise also would be helpful in trying to identify the policy gaps and implement it effectively?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would like to comment anything further, Ms. Nalini, before we go to the next leg of the discussion.
I think just listening to some of the field experiences, just going back to cases of domestic violence, for example, it's like it's an invisible crime. It's so rampant. It's all over the place. But there's hardly very little reporting that happens. But I've seen, for example, there's been quite a bit of an effort in addressing these kind of issues as well. But there's still a long way to go in terms of, we see these Bharosa centers and few other, that's coming up, and in various states they're coming up to one-stop crime prevention centers as well. So these are all coming up. It's a good sign. But then when we talked about bringing several people to support from various strands, like psychologists and doctors and people, legal experts and so on, to be a part of a larger team to address these issues. I think to some extent I have seen these things happening, and a lot of experts coming on board and working along with police. This thing is coming up, especially in relation to women's safety. That's a good sign. We see now more number of reports, of domestic violence, that it's coming up quite a bit. So there's a bit of confidence building that's happening. But I think largely it's more possibly in the urban areas. That has to go again onto the rural areas. We also see very good technology applications, now we face a time where we don't have to go to bank at all. All the transactions we do online. Likewise, I think the police also has to some extent come on to that level where you have these Hawkeye applications which are there for women to report then and there, and they have their 10 or 15 minutes time or something by which you will have a patrolling van coming and reporting, and they all stick to that time. So these are some very positive outcomes that we are seeing, but there's still lots to build in terms of building trust and confidence in women to come forward and report issues, because it's not just getting a more number of cases being reported, but also looking at what happens to the woman who reports, what are the consequences she faces, what are the fears that happen to her, and look at issues more holistically. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Vasuprada, now it comes to you as psychology, and how you are also mentioning about some World Health Organization protocols, and there are many protocols actually. I mean, within the system, in the police also there are protocols, but it all depends on how I mean, why should one even consider following a policy unless there is an incentive to it?
Right.
And why should anyone, I mean, everyone's busy in their own walks of life. Even in the government setup, you can see we are busy trying to come up with policies and governance modules. And we talk about ethics and we talk about democracy and all. But at the end of the day, what is that people are looking for? What is that the citizens are looking for? They want their tummies to be filled. They want peace within themselves and peace within the family, and they would like to happily sleep and then wake up. So this is what majority of the population seeks for. And there's other population which might seek for growing economically, trying to build towers, and I mean, there's all human perceptions and wants. We can't say this is wrong or this is right. In this kind of I'm not even considering it like a Gotham City or something, like how someone should come like a Batman and try to resolve all the policing structures. And of course, I mean, for the record, the Center of Excellence that we are proposing, it's not any parallel kind of a government which we're trying to come up with, but it's just there, to support the ongoing governance system through the police, to get the discipline instilled. So, I mean, these intelligences that we are talking about, psychology has a greater role to play in it. Ideally with regards to the behavioralism, because it's public policy, it's to deal with politics, it's to deal with legislative branch. And so it would be great if you could just drop in these protocols that you would like to highlight anything, and that we could actually inculcate in our policy proposal here through this Center of Excellence.
Primarily, I think inclusion is one of the major things that they talked about. No, I'm good, I'm audible. So I would say it's more about, when we say about inclusion, it's all about the inclusion of the victim actually. More often than not, the person who's undergone any kind of distress. I would like to take the example of either the victim of domestic violence, but maybe also somebody who's been through rape. Multiple number of times those cases are not even reported, and strangely in a journal of by British Medical Journal published it under the title of epidemiology about crime, unreported crimes. So unreported crimes have become epidemics. It's become an epidemic because we do not want to report the crime. So, of course, India and many other very similar socio-cultural backgrounds wherein, it's all about what will the other person think, and how am I going to get treated when I actually talk about my, what I went through. So a victim is unfortunately always hidden behind a curtain of shame, because this shaming of victims has become a huge thing, and we have heard multiple times everywhere when an incident like this occurs, even people in slightly prominent positions say that this girl should have been more careful. She should have done this. She shouldn't have dressed that way. So we are shaming a victim, and so the guilt, because we also do this. Another thing that happens in families with the typical socio-economic, psycho-socio-economic groups that we are, it's an ecosystem that we are in. When a child talks about being molested in a house by, let us say, an uncle or a cousin or a neighbor, next door bhaiya ne kiya aisa, and the mother says, don't talk nonsense. Okay, so the invalidation starts at home. So the invalidation is always at home, because I have worked with many victims of abuse and child molestation, and they have the same story to tell. And of course research shows that there are many statistics available. And strangely, I was I was part of expert group on trauma protocols. We were working for a trauma protocol for Colombia. So primarily it was meant to be one of the pilots for United Nations. And it was strange that all of us who were sitting in the expert group, we had the same thing. We were just saying, yes, invalidation is the first thing. So it's very possible that if families have changed the way they look at things, maybe people are not going to be so daring as to come and do something against a child. And one of the things that I still would like to say here is, it's not gender specific. Boys are equally vulnerable to crime. And I think that is something everyone should remember. Because and this is another existing problem, that if a boy child is molested, in fact they do not even bring them to the center to report a POXO crime. This is prevention of crimes against sexual offenses for children. So it's so sad. Why only girl children get that? So I'm saying that we have to work with the mindset of people, of every one of us. As I said, we are all the stakeholders in this. We want a safe community. It's not just the police that have to do. And because you cannot just say, hey, I'll just go to a hospital, they'll make me 100% all right. No, you have to take responsibility. Just like how we cannot blame doctors for everything, you cannot blame police. So, but then we have better methods to bring the change. So possibly the hierarchical system that we have I think it has been ingrained in our minds, because we are essentially very patriarchal. So even our authority is a big thing in our country. So maybe that particular mindset has to be changed, because this hierarchical system, as even Stephen was just saying, whether it is the training, whether it is the belief, or the perception, we do not look at maybe a constable as a person who can help me. And I think it's important that we bring this concept that they can help us. And that means that this person who's taken the first rung of entry into police service should start believing that he is capable of delivering what we require. So that's the reason that we need to work with a lot of change of mindset and concepts, and whether it is, you were talking about recruitment, in cognitive intelligence, it's not just what it is, it's about situational. So you bring people even from untrained backgrounds. If it is to do with situation, I'm sure they're equally fair. So when we are talking about level playing fields, what is offered in good educational institutes is not the only thing. It's also about how they use their smart brains. So this is what I think we need to learn to identify, bring it to the fore, that we get the right kind of people into the force, or you train them and yes, involving people. Each community, let us say we all now know apartments, gated communities, give them the responsibility to handle their own safety. Let them take up the responsibility and say, we'll keep our community safe.
So when it comes to, like you said, blaming the victim, there's actually a cognitive default called a belief in a just world, right? Where we tend to believe that the victim must have done something wrong to deserve that kind of punishment. And this is because we want to believe that, if we stick to certain behaviors, if we stick to our own behaviors, nothing bad is going to happen to us. So what the attitude that we're trying to break is that it's when we say it's not the fault of the victim, is that it can happen to anybody, and that's what we need people to understand.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So time is running short. We only left with 2 minutes. So I didn't even recall the time. It's already 1 hour past.
Okay.
So any concluding remarks by anyone of the panelists? Anyone could volunteer? If not, default I'll have to do that. I don't want to. Miss Nalini, anything for 10 seconds or so?
I mean, like, see, when you're talking about, when you're talking about inclusion and all of that, especially when you're talking about rights issues, and in certain settings, if certain rights violations are grossly normalized, and it becomes a kind of a part of life in the society. So what happens at that time is when there is a slackness in taking, serious notice and recording these specific issues are really rights violations. So unless somebody comes and reports a violation, it is not even, it will not be considered as a crime, as something which is to be addressed. I mean, these are things I think we have to be really proactive about and not just being reactive, because if we want to actually create any kind of, to really transform and to bring really, bring the essence of peace, justice and all of that, I think, and security and all of that, I think it's very important to be proactive in actually taking steps to prevent rights violation. And that's where it's important to bring on board, various stakeholders, departments. If it is a gender-related issue, I think the police will have to work closely with the Women Welfare Department, women NGOs, and so on and so forth. So that there are a lot of proactive measures that come in to prevent crime rather than just trying to be reactive.
Thank you very much. And concluding. So this Center of Excellence that we are proposing, it's going to include citizen, industry and government. So we will be coming up with further policy strategy of how we could make this get implemented, and any state government that's quite interested in. But this is going to be a police Center of Excellence because we feel that even police should be included in the policy execution and checks and balances. So thank you once again all the panelists for taking out your time, and thanks to all the audience and the Bharati Institute of Public Policy for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, and God bless us all.
Thank you.